What would have happened if McLaren and Peugeot had stayed together in the 1990s? We're going to get into that and a lot more here on the Bring Back V10's debrief with me, Glenn Freeman. Really looking forward to this one. This is one of my favourite episodes of Bring Back V10s to have put together for quite some time. The full story of McLaren Peugeot in 1994. It turned out there was a lot more to it than most of us, myself included, remember. It wasn't just about engines exploding on the grid as they did once for Martin Brundle. But yeah, loads to get through here. Let's crack on. Benjamin says, do you think the McLaren-Peugeot partnership would have come good if they'd stuck it out? I know Peugeot were generally rubbish in F1, but that 1997 engine wasn't bad at all. Evan96 says, if McLaren stuck with Peugeot for 95 until 97, would they have had better seasons than they had with Mercedes? And Chris Casabianca says, what's the better season? 1997 with Mercedes or its fourth year with Peugeot if they persisted with the project. Given how pacey the Jordan was and how up and down the battle at the front was, could McLaren have been a title contender in 1997 with Peugeot power? The good thing about all these questions is that they all kind of go up to 1997. And the 97 Peugeot engine was really good. Jordan had to put in a lot of work with Peugeot to get it to that point. So 95 and 96 was still quite difficult. But yeah, 97 Peugeot had a lot of power. And when Jordan switched to Mugen Honda for 98, which was becoming a more and more Honda-backed project, Honda couldn't believe what Jordan told them when Jordan said, you're this far behind the Peugeot engine we had last year. So 97 Peugeot engine is very good. So with that in mind, if Peugeot and McLaren had stayed together, I think McLaren Peugeot 97, it's going to be pretty good, but is it going to be that different to what we saw with McLaren and Mercedes? Because the McLaren Mercedes was coming good by that point. Still a bit of unreliability. Maybe Peugeot wouldn't have had quite as many problems there. So perhaps there's a few wins left on the table by McLaren in 97 because of engine failures. So if we assume that performance-wise, it would have maybe been quite similar, I think there could have been more wins. I don't think, to pick up on Chris's question, I don't think that turns itself into a title challenge, but it does mean that McLaren goes into 1998, where everything kicks into gear with Adrian Newey coming in and the rule change where Newey absolutely nailed those 98 rules. I think McLaren arrived there with more obvious momentum. People in the team knew they had momentum by the end of 97. They just didn't have the number of victories that they should have had to back that up. It had the potential to come good if they stayed together, but as we'll probably get onto later, the question is, much like with Honda in the mid-2010s, was McLaren going to be the right environment for Peugeot to get things right? There was a personality clash there from the beginning with the people in charge of the projects. Ron Dennis at McLaren, Jean-Pierre Jabouille at Peugeot. I'm sure this is going to come up again later. You have to wonder if the two entities could have worked together to get to the point that Peugeot got to with Jordan. But yeah, if you put the 97 Peugeot engine in the 97 McLaren, the results are at least as good as we saw for McLaren Mercedes that year. I think culturally, the question is, could those two entities have got to that point together? And I think it's very valid to cast some doubt over that. Next up, talking about McLaren's engines in this era, Andrew says, should McLaren have just gone for the Lamborghini Chrysler engine instead? For those of you who don't remember the context here, and I don't think we actually got to it in the episode because we had too much to cover already, but we have covered it before. At the end of 93, McLaren tested the Lamborghini Chrysler engine as that famous plain white car that ran at Estoril. I think it ran at Silverstone as well. Ayrton Senna tested it, even once he knew he was leaving McLaren. He spoke very highly of it. McLaren didn't go with it, and the reasons that they didn't go with it, I think, stand anyway, which is that they had doubts over Chrysler's real commitment to this project. They got the impression that Chrysler wanted to do this somewhat on the cheap. I think there are even quotes at the time from people quite senior on the Chrysler side saying, we don't believe the amount of money that some manufacturers are spending is what you need to spend to be successful in F1. If you're a team considering going with that engine, that's some pretty serious red flags there. Whenever someone comes in thinking they can do something cheaper, that F1 is very expensive, and a lot of the time it's very expensive for a reason. So I think, although maybe the performance could have been quite good with that engine, I can also see that it wouldn't have developed. So it might have started out okay in 94 and then actually got worse as the year went on, whereas actually Peugeot brought a lot of updates during that season. Quite a lot of them, or too many of them, were probably focused on performance rather than reliability. But at least you could see Peugeot were trying to get there. And as we discussed in the first question, a few years later, they had got there before they weirdly started to lose interest in F1 at the end of the 90s. So I don't think McLaren would have been in a massively better position if they'd gone for the Lamborghini Chrysler engine. I had, just from reading the coverage back when we talked about late 93 stuff in the past, you can even see it from what they were saying in public. There's not a great vibe here that this is a massive commitment. It's almost, well, we've kind of been doing this on a lower level. It run with some smaller teams by that point, that engine, and they thought, McLaren are kind of in need of a new partner. Maybe we can get in there, but I'm not sure the investment was ever really there. And then Richard Royal has another variation on this question, saying, would McLaren have won races or even been a championship contender had they remained as a Ford customer? So, of course, McLaren had Ford customer V8s in 1993. Ayrton Senna won 5 races that year and finished the year strongly. Remember, those 2 great wins in Japan and Australia. By that point, McLaren, led by Senna, really had pressured Ford into giving McLaren engine parity with Benetton, who were the works team. Benetton weren't happy about that. They fought that hard. You have to wonder then, I think, without Senna, can McLaren retain that engine parity? Because without Senna, it doesn't happen in the first place. Without Senna winning races, the pressure isn't put on Ford and Benetton in a way to go, look, this is Ayrton Senna. He's doing magical things in this 1993 car. We think we want to put a better engine in that car if you're looking at it from Ford's perspective. I could see that Benetton wouldn't allow that to happen again in 94, particularly if they were thinking they were going to take a step for that season and fight for the championship themselves. So maybe McLaren would have ended up a step or two behind on engine spec. But would say a late 93 spec Ford engine in the 94 McLaren have been better than the Peugeot? I can't imagine it had been any worse, and it would have finished a lot more races. So I think they could have had a better season if they'd done another year with Ford V8s while trying to work out what their long-term future was. I don't think championship contender. Race wins, it's really hard to tell, because to get race wins in that season, you had to be either beating the Schumacher-Benetton package, or even if we look at the races that Michael wasn't there for when he was serving a ban, you've still then got to beat a Williams-Renault, and that's going to be a car that by the later stage of the season, the FW16B was actually a very good car. The Renault engine would be way more powerful than the Ford V8. Yes, Mika Hakkinen was a future star, but as we discussed in the episode, he was very rough around the edges. So you haven't got that bona fide superstar like you had in Ayrton Senna the year before. So I'm not sure there'd have been a race win. I think there'd have been a lot of podiums though. So I think McLaren, I suspect with where they ended up, and I know we're going to talk about this later, if they'd have known that the Mercedes thing was going to be there for 95, would they have been willing to go with just another year of McLaren Ford V8 for 94? Ron Dennis's ego probably wouldn't have allowed that. He wanted McLaren to have a works partner. That's why he went looking for Peugeot and didn't want to persist with the Ford power. But I do think in isolation, McLaren Peugeot in 94 versus McLaren Ford customer in 94, I think you're having the better season as a Ford customer. Right, we'll leave it there for the YouTube version of this. There'll be a much longer version of this on the Race's Patreon page in the Race Members Club. That's where you can ask questions to go in these as well. Thank you once again for supporting our early YouTube output here on Bring Back V10s. We're really enjoying putting this together. We're looking forward to doing some stuff between seasons, maybe some more short-ish stuff like this, some shorter length stuff where we talk about perhaps some old topics that we did full podcasts on before we had the video option here via YouTube. So thank you for checking these out. Let us know what you think of them. Come and have a look. There'll be a pinned comment underneath this if you want to just come and have a browse of what the members club's got to offer. You don't have to sign up to see what's going on in there. And yeah, maybe you can take part in one of these in the future.